Hey guys, tonight we're stepping inside the convent walls, the place where history likes to tell us women were kept pure, silent, and holy. You've seen the images before: golden halos painted over bowed heads, nuns kneeling with folded hands, their eyes lifted to heaven as though the world outside no longer existed. They were meant to be brides of Christ, untouched, perfect, angels trapped in human skin. That's the story. But the story is a lie. The truth is heavier, colder, and soaked with scandal. Behind those stone walls, the silence was not peaceful. It was suffocating. The prayers weren't only for God, they were a leash, yanking every woman into the same rhythm until her identity was scraped away. Families didn't send daughters because they were holy. They sent them because they were inconvenient. Too many girls to marry off, too expensive a dowry, a widow too young to remarry. Off she went to God, locked behind a door that would never open again. Once inside, money spoke louder than any prayer. Girls who came with fat dowries were pampered with softer straw, thicker bread, and lighter duties. Those with nothing spent their lives hunched over chamber pots, their fingers cracked from vinegar in cold water. Poverty meant humiliation. Holiness had a price tag. The abbess ruled like a monarch in wool. She preached humility while eating thicker stew, while her chamber glowed with beeswax candles, and her bed was lined with fresh straw. She had her favorites, noble daughters, whose families bribed her with silver and spices, and she had her scapegoats, poor novices punished for laughter, for a misplaced word, for daring to question. And then there were the secrets the church tried to bury, forbidden friendships that crossed into love, priests slipping through private doors meant for confession, but used for flesh, babies hidden in the infirmary, recorded in ledgers as miracles gone wrong, punishments so cruel that some women disappeared into reflection cells and were never seen again. Historians still fight about what convents really were. Were they prisons, locking women away in silence, or refuges that offered safety and literacy? The answer, as always, is both. For some, they were schools, libraries, places of quiet survival. For others, they were tombs where daughters were buried alive. And here's one of those strange little details that never make it into sermons. Some nuns kept squirrels as pets, real sharp-toothed, red-furred creatures nesting in straw beds, hiding inside habits, fed scraps of dried fruit during prayer. Comfort, rebellion, or madness? It's hard to tell. But it happened. So tonight, forget the paintings, forget the perfect halos. We're not here for the myth. We're here for the cold stone floors, the scratch of wool against bare skin, the whispers in the dormitory after the bell has gone quiet. This is not the story of angels. This is the story of women locked away, fighting to breathe, fighting to love, surviving scandal and silence. The gates are closing now. You're inside, and the walls won't give back what they take. The gates don't creak shut, they slam. A sound so final, it shakes the air out of your chest. The heavy oak doors are banded in iron, scarred with years of weather and fists that once pounded from the outside. The moment the lock drops, you know you're not a visitor. You're cargo that's just been delivered. A sister grips your arm, hard enough to bruise. Her fingers are cold, and her eyes are colder. She doesn't ask your name. She doesn't need it. Out here, names are meaningless. Inside, you'll be whatever the abbess decides you are. The courtyard smells of smoke and damp earth. Moss coats the flagstones, slick under your bare feet. Your shoes are gone already, stripped at the door. Your hair ribboned too. Each step is a reminder that nothing you brought with you will survive the night. Inside, the light disappears. Narrow slit windows drip thin gray beams onto stone walls that sweat with moisture. The air is thick with wax, stale bread and vinegar. You are ushered into a small chamber where the older sisters circle you. Their eyes don't meet yours. They look at your hem, your belt, your hands, the things that can be taken. They strip you fast. Your gown is tugged away, folded, removed. Your shoes vanish into a chest. If you hesitate, the hand at your shoulder pushes harder. Some convents shaved girls bald on entry, tossing hair into a box like trophies. Here, they settle for pinning a veil so tight it drags your scalp backward. Either way, your body is no longer yours. The habit they give you is coarse wool, heavy as chains, reeking of sweat and incense. The sleeves dangle past your wrists. The hem cuts short above your ankles. The rope belt digs like a brand. It was never made for you. It was made to erase you. The abbess appears then. Her face is lined like cracked wood, her mouth a straight cut, her eyes sharper than any blade. She doesn't greet you. She mutters to an attendant in Latin, her voice a rasp. You catch one word only, Novitia. Novitia, that's all you are now. Not daughter, not sister, not yourself, just novice. They lead you into the chapel. The floor bites cold into your bare feet. A dozen beeswax candles hiss, their smoke curling around the crucifix. The carved Christ stares down with eyes that follow. You kneel. The stone cuts into your knees until you think the skin might split. The abbess drones a prayer in Latin, words you barely understand, but the meaning is clear enough. The girl you were is dead. What rises from the floor belongs not to you, not to your family, but to the convent and to God. In some convents, the ritual is crueler, a black cloth thrown over the novice, a mock funeral, or a shallow grave dug in the garden, the girl laid inside before being pulled out and declared reborn. You've heard whispers of these things. Tonight it's simpler, pain instead of burial, silence instead of death. When the chanting ends, the abbess nods once. No smiles, no comfort. You have been erased. Your first task is not prayer, it is scrubbing. A brush no bigger than your palm is shoved into your hand. You kneel on the cloister walk, scrubbing stone already clean with water that stinks of vinegar. Your knees bruise, your fingers sting, your back bends until it throbs. The brush is too small, the task pointless. That's the lesson. Obedience measured in pain, not in progress. Next to you, another novice mutters under her breath. Sister Magdala. Her face is hard, her hands red from soap, her voice dripping with bitterness. My brother got the inheritance. My parents didn't want to waste money marrying me off. So here I am. Saved, they call it. She smirks. Saved for what, I wonder? By complying, you reek of vinegar and sweat. Your stomach is empty. Your arms tremble. Your knees are raw. You are marched into the chapel again. Voices rising in psalms you stumble over. Latin syllables scrape out of your throat, barely formed, but better to mumble than be caught silent. The abbess's gaze is sharp as a blade. No food tonight. Hunger purifies, she says. The dormitory is a long hall crammed with straw mattresses, shoulder to shoulder. The air is thick with sweat, old linen, and smoke. You lie down, straw stabbing your back, wool scratching your skin. Your stomach growls in the dark. Someone whispers a name, not Christ's. Another giggles, quickly smothered. Then comes the jingle of keys. Sister Rebecca, the enforcer, prowling the hall like a hound, sniffing for sin. Silence returns like a shroud. You close your eyes, but sleep won't come. The bells will rip you awake long before your body is ready. This is your first night, your first lesson. The convent does not want your faith. It wants your silence. And you understand, finally, that entering these walls is not devotion, it is disappearance. Morning doesn't arrive with sunlight, it arrives with bells. The clanging tears you out of sleep before the sky has even thought about turning gray. The sound doesn't drift like a church chime. It crashes, relentless, filling every stone of the dormitory until your skull feels cracked open. Around you, straw rustles. Robes scrape against skin. Groans slide through clenched teeth. Some whispered prayers. Some curses too quiet to be punished. You pull yourself upright. The air is cold enough to burn your lungs. Your robe is stiff, damp from your own sweat and the fog that creeps in at night. You shove your feet onto the stone floor, and it feels like stepping into ice water. The sisters rise in a slow wave, 20 shadows moving in rhythm, silent but for the bells. You shuffle with them down the corridor, every step rehearsed, drilled, beaten into habit. The chapel is darker than the dormitory. Candles spit and hiss in iron sconces. The crucifix hangs above, massive, wooden, its Christ staring down with eyes that don't blink. You kneel. Stone digs into your knees again, as though last night never ended. The chanting begins. Latin, droning, endless. The words blur together. You mouth them anyway, your lips moving in rhythm with the sisters around you. Better to mumble than be caught. Better to seem devout than to invite suspicion. This is Matins, the first of 8 prayers you'll be forced to repeat today. Matins, Lauds, Prime, Terce, Sext, Nun, Vespers, Compline. Bells will drag you to your knees again and again until you forget where the hours begin and end. Prayer isn't devotion here, it's obedience. When the service ends, you expect food. None comes. Hunger is part of the training. The abbess says an empty stomach sharpens the soul, keeps lust at bay. You soon learn hunger just makes your hands shake and your mind wander. Breakfast, when it finally arrives, is a crust of barley bread, so hard you nearly crack a tooth. A wedge of gray cheese spotted with mold. A bowl of broth so thin you can see the bottom. You chew slowly, not for flavor, but to trick your body into believing it's enough. Historians wrote about this without shame. Fasting wasn't just occasional, it was policy. Some rules forbade eating more than 2 boiled eggs a week. Too much nourishment, they claimed, inflamed the flesh. Thinness was holiness. Hunger was virtue. Then the work begins. The pit. Some are sent to the fields. Mud clings to your ankles while you claw weeds from frozen soil. Nails split, fingers numb, knees sinking until you can't tell where the earth ends and you begin. Others go to the laundry. The water is ice, the soap harsh, the tunics heavy with weeks of sweat. You plunge your hands into basins until the skin peels, beating cloth against stone until your wrists ache. Sometimes you're sent to the scriptorium, and outsiders imagine this is mercy. It isn't. The room reeks of boiled leather and ink, so acrid it stings your nose. You slice calfskin parchment into sheets thin enough to tear if you breathe wrong. Sister Cataline watches every cut with hawk eyes, waiting to pounce on mistakes. One drop of blood on vellum, one blot of ink, and you'll be punished with hours of penitential psalms on your knees. Silence is demanded everywhere. Silence in the fields, in the laundry, in the scriptorium. The abbess says words are wasted breath. Laughter is worse. Sister Rebecca stalks the halls, keys jingling like chains, ready to drag anyone who whispers into the reflection cell. a stone box with no light, no warmth, no sound but your own heartbeat. But silence is never empty. It hums with secrets. A mutter as someone passes a bucket, a half-finished word in the garden, the scrape of a note being tucked into a psalter. You start to realize the convent lives in two rhythms, the loud rhythm of bells and chants, and the quiet rhythm beneath, carried on whispers. By midday, you can barely stand. By none, your back burns. By complying, you are no longer yourself. You are a shadow, kneeling, rising, kneeling again, a body trained to move when the bell commands it. The dormitory stinks of smoke and damp linen. You lie on straw that stabs your back, your stomach hollow, your knees raw. Someone coughs. Someone mutters a prayer. Someone else whispers a name that isn't holy. You close your eyes, the bells will rip you awake again before long. This is the routine. Prayer, hunger, labor, silence, not holiness, not peace. Discipline sharpened into a blade that cuts you thinner every day. By your third day inside, the shape of the convent is clearer, not its stones or its cloisters. You already know those are cold, unyielding, the same from dawn to night. What you see now is the structure beneath the silence, the hidden hierarchy, the order that decides who eats, who starves, who kneels until their knees bleed, and who sings in the scriptorium with clean hands. It has nothing to do with prayer, nothing to do with holiness, everything to do with money. You notice it first at supper. The stew is the same thin broth you've seen before, carrots boiled until they collapse, barley floating on the surface. Your bowl is filled quickly, barely enough to cover the bottom. Then you watch as Joan, the noble-born novice, holds out hers. The ladle dips deeper, scooping from the bottom where the fat and vegetables sink. Her portion steams richer, thicker. She tears into softer bread, while you chew a crust so hard it grinds your teeth. The difference doesn't stop at meals. Straw tells the story too. Your mattress stinks of mildew, damp clumps that poke your spine until sleep is impossible. Joan's bedding smells fresh, stuffed with new grass, covered by a blanket mended carefully, the stitches tight and neat. A gift, you realize, not from God, from her family's purse. Magdala explains it one evening, when Sister Rebecca's keys are far enough away not to hear. Her voice is low, her hands raw from soap. 3 tiers, she mutters. Tier 1, the daughters with full dowries. They're untouchable. They eat better, sleep better. Their chores are lighter. Tier 2, half dowry. They keep their heads down, take what they're given. Tier 3, no dowry at all. She looks at her cracked hands, then at yours. That's us. We scrub until there's nothing left to scrub. And still, it isn't enough. Her laugh is sharp, bitter, holiness they call it. I call it a debt we can't pay. The next day, her words prove true. You're sent to scrub chamber pots until your head swims from the stench. Joan sits in the garden under an apple tree, embroidering silk with smooth fingers, her cheeks warmed by sunlight. She glances at you once, not with malice, not with kindness, just with the indifference of someone who has never known vinegar on her skin. The abbess enforces it without shame. She glides through the refectory with Joan at her side, a pale shadow with perfect posture and clean hands. The abbess's smile is thin, her gaze sharp, but it softens whenever Joan speaks. When Joan sings at Mass, her voice is praised as angelic. When you stumble over Latin syllables, you're scolded for disturbing the chant. Historians who comb the visitation records write it down in careful Latin. Nuns with money lived softer, worked less, suffered fewer punishments. Those without coin were treated as burdens. In the language of the abbess, charity cases. In truth, servants cloaked in habits. That night, you tear at your bread, stale and tasteless. Across the hall, Joan dips hers in honey. Real honey, a rarity in these walls. Her family sent a gift of spices, the rumor goes, and the abbess rewarded her with sweetness. The sight makes your mouth ache with envy. Magdala leans close, her voice a whisper hot against your ear. God may see us all the same, she says, but here the abbess's eyes are the only ones that matter, and they see silver brighter than souls. You chew your crust until your jaw hurts, the taste of dust and bitterness on your tongue. The bells toll again. You rise with the rest, knees stiff, stomach hollow, the truth sharper now than hunger. In the convent, salvation is purchased, not prayed for. And if you came here with nothing, nothing is all you'll ever be allowed to have. The abbess is not a mother. She is not a shepherd. She is a ruler, and these walls are her kingdom. She walks the cloister with her veil stiff around her face, rosary beads clacking like coins in her hands. Her steps are slow, deliberate, the kind of walk meant to remind you she has nowhere else to be, nothing else to fear. She doesn't need to rush. The walls obey her. The women inside bend to her word as if it were scripture. When she preaches humility, her own meals arrive heavier than yours. While you gnaw on barley bread, she dips hers in thick stew, steam rising into her face. When she extols poverty, her chamber glows with tall beeswax candles that burn clean and bright, while the rest of you squint at tallow stubs that choke the air with greasy smoke. When she commands obedience, you notice the way her robe is stitched from finer wool than the one scratching your own skin. You begin to understand that holiness in this place is a performance, and the abbess directs it. She has her circle, though no one dares call it that. Joan is always near her. Joan, whose dowry was heavy enough to buy privileges you will never touch. Joan doesn't scrub the cloister floor until her knees bleed. She doesn't haul water until her back bends. Her hands stay soft, her face pale, her hair hidden under a veil, but rumored to be golden. The abbess favors her, praises her voice in mass, smiles when Joan speaks. Everyone sees it. No one dares whisper it aloud. The abbess keeps her favorites warm and her burdens cold. She doles out tasks not by devotion, but by worth, a gift from a family, and suddenly a novice is transferred from the laundry to the scriptorium, a cask of wine delivered from a merchant, and the next day his daughter is excused from fasting, a sack of grain given at harvest, and the abbess's table brims, while the rest of the convent chews crusts. One evening, as you pass her chamber, you hear voices, a man's voice, low, laughing. The door is shut, but the sound carries through the crack. You catch the clink of goblets, the murmur of words not meant for novices' ears. The next morning, meat appears in the refectory stew, a luxury none of you have seen in months. No explanation is offered. None is needed. The records left by bishops tell the same story in careful Latin, half ashamed, half shocked. Abbesses caught hoarding coin meant for the poor. Others accused of selling relics, tiny bones passed off as saints' remains, exchanged for gold. Some invited nobles to feast behind convent walls, their halls echoing with laughter and song while their novices starved. The church buried most of it, of course. Better to speak of angels than corruption. But the scraps that remain paint the picture clearly. Power inside these walls was not only spiritual, it was political, financial, and personal. You see it every time the abbess's eyes sweep over you. She doesn't see your soul. She sees your value, your worth weighed, not in prayer, not in labor, not in fame, but in what your family gave or failed to give. She speaks of God with honey on her tongue, but the taste in your mouth is sour, and you realize that inside these walls, the abbess does not serve heaven, she serves herself. Silence is the law of the convent, but silence is never empty. At night, in the long dormitory lined with straw mattresses, it hums with whispers. A giggle smothered into a sleeve, a name breathed soft in the dark, the sound of straw shifting as two novices lean too close. The abbess calls them particular friendships. The phrase is neat, clean, designed to hide what it really means. Attachments that burn too brightly, bonds that cross from comfort into desire. In a place where warmth is rationed, where laughter is punished, where touch is forbidden, those bonds grow like weeds between stones. You hear it first, after complying, lying on your back, the straw stabbing your ribs. A voice 2 beds over murmurs a name, not Christ's. Another girl answers with a muffled laugh. Then the jingle of Sister Rebecca's keys snaps the sound in half. Silence falls hard, but the air still tingles. By day, the signs are subtler. A hand passed across bread, fingers brushing a second too long. 2 sisters always assigned to the same work, their shoulders touching as they bend over laundry. A glance held too long in chapel, lips moving in psalms, but eyes fixed on each other. One afternoon in the scriptorium, as you copy lines of Latin you barely understand, you notice a folded scrap pressed into the margin of a psalter. Later, alone, you unfold it with trembling hands. A single line of verse, written in cramped ink. Your voice is the hymn I cannot silence. No name, no signature, just a pulse of longing, hidden in holy pages. Historians have found these scraps, real letters, real poems, kept for centuries in archives, their words fragile but still burning. Some sound like prayers, cloaked in metaphor. Others are naked in their confession, a nun writing to her beloved sister, promising she dreams of her every night. The church called it sin. Today we call it what it was, love. But the abbess watches. She warns against such attachments, her voice sharp as a knife. Affection belongs to Christ alone, she says, her eyes flicking across the rows of bowed heads. Love your sisters in God, not beyond Him. The words fall heavy, but they don't kill the roots. They only drive them deeper underground. Because punishment is real. Those caught are torn apart, separated to opposite ends of the dormitory, forbidden to speak, forced to fast until their ribs show, or locked in reflection cells where silence is so complete it scrapes sanity away. Chronicles tell of novices paraded with their veils ripped off, their heads shaved, mocked as daughters of Sodom in front of the entire convent. And yet, still, the whispers come, still the glances linger, still the letters circulate, hidden in hymns, in prayer books, in embroidery stitches. No abbess would think to check. You lie awake in the dark, the bell's hours away. A name drifts through the air again. Not Christ's, not holy, just human. And you understand why they risk it. In a place that starves the body, warmth is rebellion. In a place that demands silence, a whispered name is survival. The abbess can command prayer, fasting, obedience, but she cannot kill desire. It blooms even here, between the stones. The convent whispers about love, but the convent punishes it louder. When whispers grow too warm, when glances burn too long, when letters are discovered tucked into straw or bound into psalters, the abbess acts, and her justice is never quiet. You see it first with two novices. They were caught after Compline, their hands still tangled together when Sister Rebecca's lamp swept the dormitory. The abbess wasted no time. At dawn, the girls were dragged before the convent, veils torn from their heads, hair hacked short with a knife that left jagged edges around their scalps. They were paraded through the cloister, the abbess's voice ringing like a bell. Daughters of Sodom. Every sister was forced to watch as they stumbled barefoot over stone, shamed into silence. That night, they slept on opposite ends of the dormitory, forbidden to speak, eyes swollen red. Separation is the first punishment. Friends torn apart, never assigned to the same work, never seated side by side in chapel, never allowed a whisper in the garden. Silence becomes a cage, but when silence fails, harsher measures follow. Fasting is the abbess's favorite blade. Days stretch with no bread, no broth, nothing but water. Bones show through habits. Skin sags, faces grow hollow. Hunger eats faster than sin, the abbess says. Some women faint during prayer, collapse in the cloister, lips cracked and eyes sunken. The abbess only nods. Proof, she insists, that sin burns away through emptiness. The reflection cell is worse, a narrow chamber of stone, no window, no straw, only damp walls that sweat with the night. A novice can be locked inside for hours, days, left with nothing but her own breath echoing off the walls. Some sing psalms to stay sane. Others scream until their voices shatter. One chronicle describes a sister found half mad after a week, scratching prayers into the stone with her fingernails. Historians record punishments, so brutal they read like theater. In a 14th century visitation, 2 nuns accused of excessive affection were forced to confess before the entire convent, kneeling naked to the waist in winter frost, whipped with rods while psalms were sung around them. The record notes they repented. The ink does not say what scars were left behind. And still the punishments never worked. After the fasting, after the shaming, after the hair was shorn and the lashes delivered, the whispers always returned. Names breathed in the dark, scraps of verse hidden in hymns, touches that risked everything for one heartbeat of warmth. The abbess preaches that love between sisters is the devil's trick, a temptation worse than hunger. But you begin to see it differently. Love is not rebellion against God. It is rebellion against her, against the stone, the silence, the routine that carves the soul into obedience. You lie awake, straw pricking your back, the bell's hours away. Somewhere across the dormitory, you hear it, a name, whispered so softly it might be a prayer. And you realize this truth: the punishments will never stop the whispers. They only make them mean more. The convent walls keep men out, or that's the illusion. The truth is, they slip inside with ease, not through the gates, but through doors cut for them alone. The confessor's door, carved small, narrow, hidden at the side of the chapel. A passage meant for holiness, a passage that becomes something else. And he arrives after lauds, robe sweeping, eyes cast low, as if weighed down by scripture. The sisters bow as he passes, though none meet his gaze for long. The abbess greets him with a dip of her head, her voice dripping with respect that borders on fear. For while she rules the cloister, he rules the soul. Confession is supposed to be salvation. You kneel behind the screen, your breath hot in the dark, the wood pressing against your forehead. He asks the questions, not gentle questions, not always holy ones. Have you harbored impure thoughts? Have you touched yourself in secret? Have you looked with lust upon another? His words slither between prayer and invasion. Your silence is dangerous, but your answers are worse. Either way, he learns more about your body than you ever speak aloud to yourself. Some sisters leave the confessional trembling, their faces pale as wax. Others flush red, lips trembling with words they cannot say. Rumors ripple fast that he lingers too long with certain women, that the door to the abbess's chamber creaks late at night, his shadow slipping inside with his lantern dimmed. The next morning, the abbess looks sharper, her robe finer, the convent bowls filled a little higher, coin for salvation, bodies for silence. There are records, visitation notes from bishops, chronicles left by disgusted scribes, detailing priests accused of exploiting the women they were meant to shepherd, pregnancies hushed with bribes, infants hidden in infirmaries, blame heaped always on the nun. The man confessor would be reassigned. The woman would be shamed, punished, erased. The weight of confession never lifts. Each time the door closes, you feel smaller. Your sins are demanded, named, cataloged, and pressed back against you. He is the gate to absolution, and he knows it. You kneel, you confess, you obey, and you leave stripped bare, your soul picked over like carrion. One night, lying on your straw mattress, you hear the creak of the confessor's door again. It opens, closes, and footsteps echo soft against the cloister stones. They fade toward the abbess's chamber. No one speaks. No one dares. In the morning, the convent is served fresh bread. You chew slowly, the taste bitter, and realize this. Behind these walls, confession is not salvation, it is control, and the priest does not leave his power at the chapel door. He carries it into every shadow of the cloister. The confessor's shadow never stays in the chapel. It seeps into the dormitory, the cloister, the infirmary, the abbess's chamber. The walls are supposed to keep men out, but the truth is that some slip deeper inside than anyone dares to speak. It starts with rumors, a novice who avoids the chapel for days, eyes lowered, lips cracked from fasting she was never ordered to do, an older sister whose veil hangs loose around her face, her silence heavier than the others. Whispers spread quickly, traded in fragments, the confessor's hand too firm on a shoulder, his visit stretching long past prayers, his questions and confession twisting into commands. One evening, you notice the abbess's door again. The light flickers behind it, shadows bending across the wall. The priest's voice is low, steady, almost soothing, and the abbess laughs, a strange, sharp laugh you've never heard from her before. The next morning, meat appears in the refectory stew, and the novices bow lower in thanks. Sometimes the whispers grow into something harder to hide. A sister taken ill, her body swelling, her cheeks pale, the infirmary curtain drawn tighter than usual, no explanations offered. Then weeks later, silence. No child is seen, no sound of crying. The ledger records only a miracle gone wrong, or a death unnamed. Historians found fragments of these scandals buried in visitation records, written with cold detachment. One nun, heavy with child, confessed she had been misled by her confessor. Misled, as though her voice could carry equal weight against his. The punishment fell on her alone, shaving, fasting, exile to another house. The priest, quietly reassigned, his sin forgotten with the stroke of a pen. There are darker stories, too. Infants smothered at birth, their small bodies hidden in ovens, wrapped in linen and buried in the garden. Others passed off as orphans taken in for charity, the truth swallowed whole by the abbess's silence. The convent was a vault where shame could be locked away, and only the women paid the price. At night, you lie in the dormitory and listen to the rhythm of breathing around you. You wonder which of these women carry secrets heavier than silence, who has been cornered in confession, who has carried shame pressed into her body until it broke her. You wonder how many of the whispers in the dark are not love, but fear. And as the bells drag you awake again before dawn, you realize the convent's greatest secret is not silence, not obedience, not devotion. It is survival. From the moment you stepped inside the convent, your body was no longer your own, but some parts of it carry more weight than others. Here, virginity is not just virtue, it is currency. When you entered, they looked at you as if you were a ledger to be balanced. Not a girl, not a novice, but a question. Was your purity intact? Families spoke of it like coin, bargaining with abbesses, assuring them their daughters were untouched, unspoiled, clean for God. Sometimes those promises came with chests of silver to make sure no one questioned it too closely. For those who doubted, there were tests, crude, humiliating rituals whispered in chronicles. Midwives called in to examine young bodies, fingers cold, eyes sharp, their judgments final. Some wrote that linen was inspected for blood after a novice's first night in the dormitory, as if God himself had left a receipt. Failure meant shame, sometimes exile. The obsession with chastity runs through every sermon, every warning. The abbess preaches it with fire in her eyes. Your body belongs to Christ and Christ alone. Yet behind her words is calculation. A virgin sister is valuable. Her vows are untainted, her family's honor preserved, her prayers believed to carry more weight. But rumors gnaw at the edges. A girl too lively, too free with her laughter, may find herself whispered about. Doubt spreads faster than fact. A noble family might rush to bribe the abbess, pressing coin into her hand to protect their daughter's name. A poor novice has no such shield. Once suspicion touches her, it sticks. Historians have found records of these rituals, dry lines in Latin detailing examinations for purity. Behind the words lies cruelty. Some novices were forced to stand half naked in front of their sisters, accused of impurity because of nothing more than a jealous whisper. Others were locked in reflection cells until they confessed sins they never committed. And all the while, the men who entered through the confessor's door were never measured, never judged. Their bodies were never weighed as currency. Only the women, always the women. You feel it every time the abbess's eyes linger on you, sharp as a blade. Every mistake, every laugh, every slip in prayer. Suddenly it means more. Suddenly it's not just a mistake, but a stain, a crack in the coin of your worth. You chew your bread in silence, aware that your value here isn't measured by your prayers, your labor, or your soul. It's measured by a word, virgin. And you understand that in the convent, holiness is not free. It is bought and sold on the backs of women who had no choice but to kneel. The abbess tells you your body is a vessel of sin. The sermons carve it into you again and again. Flesh is temptation, hunger is danger, desire is the devil's whisper. And yet, behind the walls of the convent, women carry knowledge of the body that no priest will ever admit exists. It lives in the infirmary, in the cupboards that smell of herbs and earth. It lives in whispered recipes passed from older sisters to novices when the abbess isn't listening. Parsley seeds, pennyroyal, rue plants that heal, plants that soothe, plants that end pregnancies before they begin. To the church, they are weeds. To women, they are lifelines. You see it first when Sister Agnes, stooped and quiet, brews a dark tea for a novice doubled over in pain. The abbess calls it stomach weakness. Agnes calls it what it is, blood that comes too heavy, too sharp, the kind that can take a life if not calmed. The tea works. The novice rises, pale but breathing. No priest ever writes this down. There are darker whispers, too. A novice whose belly swelled after too many visits to the confessor's door. An herb mixed into wine, a bitter draught swallowed in silence, and within days the girl is back at work, her face ghost pale. The convent ledger records nothing. History calls it rumor, but the herbs tell the truth. The knowledge isn't just about birth and blood. Sisters trade secrets about easing hunger pangs, about calming coughs, about herbs that bring sleep when bells tear the night apart. One rubs garlic on wounds, another mixes honey and vinegar to fight infection. Remedies passed hand to hand, carved into memory because parchment is too dangerous. If the bishop found such notes, they would be burned as witchcraft. And sometimes that's exactly what they were called. Healers branded heretics, midwives accused of sorcery for knowing too much. A convent in Germany was investigated when too many miracle cures were reported. The bishop claimed demons whispered to the sisters. More likely, it was rosemary and sage. Historians write of these things in careful Latin, cloaked in words like superstitio and beneficium. But when you sit in the infirmary and smell the bitter herbs boiling in a pot, it isn't superstition, it's survival. You realize then that the convent carries two kinds of knowledge. The knowledge spoken in sermons, pressed into your skull with every bell and chant, and the knowledge kept quiet, whispered from woman to woman, buried in the earth and stirred into teas at night. The abbess can command silence, the priest can demand confession, but the secrets of the female body belong to the sisters alone, and they will never write them into scripture. Whispers fill the convent, but sometimes whispers grow too loud to hide. Then they spill into ledgers, into court records, into the mouths of bishops forced to explain why God's brides are carrying sins heavier than stone. These become the scandals, the stories too big for silence. You hear them first as rumors passed like contraband. A nun whose belly swelled, who claimed the Holy Spirit had visited her. Not metaphor, not vision. Pregnancy disguised as miracle. For a while the abbess defended her until the child was born. The chronicles say the infant died within hours, but the shame lingered for decades. Her name was scrubbed from the convent's rolls. The priest involved, his name was never written at all. Other records survive in fragments. A bishop's report from France in the 14th century describing improper attachments discovered in a convent dormitory. The evidence, love letters hidden in prayer books, novices caught embracing after complying. The punishment, heads shaved, fasting until ribs showed, exile to another house. The bishop wrote coldly. They were corrected. The women themselves vanished into silence. In Italy, an abbess was accused of hosting feasts with noblemen, the convent's funds drained into wine and music. The church called it corruption. The townsfolk called it an open secret. She was replaced, but her name survives in angry letters, proof that behind the walls, piety and pleasure often mixed. Some scandals turned violent. Chronicles describe a convent in Spain where a group of nuns rebelled against their abbess, locking her out of her own chamber after years of cruel punishment. The bishop's men arrived within days, dragging the ringleaders away in chains. No one ever saw them again. And then there are the trials, not whispered rumors, but public theater. In one English case, 2 sisters were hauled before a church court accused of unnatural sin. They were forced to confess before an audience of their peers, stripped of their veils, beaten until blood soaked their habits. The record claims they repented. The silence of their names suggests they did not survive long after. History tries to bury these fragments, but they leak through the cracks. The archivist's careful Latin cannot hide the scandal underneath. The convent, painted as holy refuge, was also stage and prison, courtroom and gallows. When you hear the whispers at night, the laughter smothered into straw, the names passed mouth to mouth, you remember the records, you remember the punishments, and you know every whisper carries the weight of risk. Risk of being caught, risk of being named, risk of being erased. The convent thrives on silence, but history proves the silence was never clean. It was cracked, stained, loud enough that even the bishops had to write it down. The convent is built to hold you. Stone walls rise high, gates grown shut with iron locks, doors sealed at night, but no wall is high enough, no lock strong enough to cage a woman who chooses freedom over silence. And sometimes, despite the risks, nuns ran. You hear their names in whispers, half admiration, half warning. Sister Beatrice, who vanished one stormy night, her straw bed left cold. Some said she disguised herself as a monk, shaved her head, and walked straight out the front gate while the porter dozed. Others claimed she fled into the forest and joined a band of outlaws. The abbess declared her damned. The novices murmured her name like a prayer. Another tale is sharper, darker. In Lubeck, a nun slipped from her convent and boarded a ship. She traded her veil for a sailor's cap, her rosary for coin. Weeks later, she was spotted running a tavern on the coast, pouring ale for men who once would have spat at her robes. The records say the bishop hunted her down, whether she was dragged back in chains or vanished into the smoke of her own heart. No one knows. But not all escape stories end in freedom. In Florence, a group of nuns plotted together, tired of hunger, tired of silence, tired of watching the abbess feast while their bellies ached. They scaled the convent wall one night, ropes cut from twisted sheets. They didn't make it far. Guards caught them before dawn, dragging them back with torn habits and bloody feet. The abbess ordered their heads shaved, their bodies beaten, their mouths silenced with fasting, until one collapsed and never rose again. The chronicles mark it as discipline. You feel it as execution. Historians find traces of these women in court cases, in complaints lodged by bishops. They are almost always unnamed. One sister fled. 2 nuns abandoned their vows. Their punishments are listed, their lives erased. But between the lines, you see the outline of rebellion. You see the fire that walls and hunger could not snuff out. At night, lying on straw that pricks your back, you stare at the ceiling beams and imagine the rope of twisted sheets. You imagine the gate left ajar, the silence broken by your own footsteps fading into the dark. The convent says escape is death for the soul, but sometimes, you think, escape is the only way to live. The abbess preaches that the body is weakness, that illness is God's punishment, that only prayer can cure the soul. But the sisters know better. Behind the sermons, behind the chants, a different knowledge flows hand to hand, the knowledge of herbs, roots, and whispered remedies. The infirmary smells of earth and smoke. Bundles of sage, rue, and rosemary hang from the rafters, their shadows swaying against the wall. Bowls of honey glisten beside jars of vinegar. This is where the secrets live, passed from older sisters to novices in hushed voices when no priest is near. A cough that rattles the lungs, honey boiled with thyme, bleeding that won't stop, spiderweb pressed into the wound, a stomach swollen with pain, pennyroyal steeped in hot water, bitter enough to make you gag. Some herbs heal, some end life. Everyone knows it. but no one says it aloud. You see it one night when a novice collapses in the cloister, her face pale, her hands trembling. Sister Agnes drags her to the infirmary, shutting the door tight. You linger outside, catching only the hiss of boiling water, the sharp scent of crushed rue. The next morning, the novice returns to work, her cheeks still gray, but her body lighter. No word is spoken. The abbess calls it God's mercy. You know it was Agnes's hands. There are darker whispers, too. Pregnancies hushed with tease, strong enough to tear the body inside out. Bitter draughts swallowed in silence. The girl left white as chalk, but able to return to her chores within days. The convent ledger records nothing, but the women remember. Historians uncovered scraps of these practices buried in court records, usually written in the language of accusation: beneficium, poisoning, superstitio, superstition. Women were condemned for knowing too much about the body, about blood, about how to stop life or bring it back from the edge. A convent in Saxony was investigated when too many cures were reported. The bishop claimed the sisters were whispering with demons. More likely, they were boiling sage in copper pots. And yet the line between healer and witch is thin. A woman who eases pain is praised. A woman who ends a pregnancy is damned. Both use the same leaves, the same roots, the same whispered recipes hidden in memory. At night, in the dormitory, you hear stories traded in low voices. A sister who kept amulets sewn into her habit, charms against fever. Another who carved secret symbols into embroidery, talismans woven into holy cloth. Some say it was witchcraft. Some say it was survival. Maybe it was both. You realize then that the convent carries two kinds of power. The abbess's power, built on fear, on silence, on punishment, and the sister's secret power, rooted in the earth, whispered into steaming cups, hidden in the shadows of the infirmary. And in the end, you wonder which power saved more lives. The abbess tells you visions are gifts from God, signs of holiness, proof of divine favor. But you begin to notice that visions here are slippery things. They come with sweat, with screams, with bodies trembling on the stone floor. They look less like heaven's touch and more like madness, or desire dressed up in scripture. One night during vigils, Sister Agnes collapses mid-psalm. Her body arches, her arms spread wide, her breath rattling in her chest. She cries out a name, not Christ's, but one she claims belongs to an angel who visits her in dreams. Later, she describes being embraced in light so warm it felt like fire against her skin. The abbess calls it ecstasy, proof of sainthood. You wonder if it was something else, a vision tangled with the body's secret hungers. Historians have left fragments of these moments, written in the cautious language of clerks. Some nuns claimed mystical marriages to Christ, describing themselves as brides visited in the night. His touch so vivid, it left their thighs trembling. Others wrote of kisses from angels, of voices whispering love in the dark. To the church, these were holy when convenient, and dangerous when not. The line between vision and sin blurred constantly. A woman who spoke of Christ's embrace might be canonized. A woman who cried out too vividly, who wrote down her longing in words too carnal, might be condemned as possessed. Hildegard of Bingen wrote songs of divine passion and was praised. Beatrix of Ornesieux cried of burning desire and was silenced. You see it again when Sister Clarice enters the chapel alone after complying. Hours later, she is found kneeling, her habit soaked in sweat, her face streaked with tears. She insists she saw Christ, that he came to her as a bridegroom. that his kiss tasted sweeter than honey. The abbess beams, ordering her to record the vision for the convent's archives. Clarice's hands still shake as she writes, her eyes wide and hollow. But not all visions are celebrated. Sister Magdala whispers to you one morning that a nun in another house once claimed she saw the Virgin bleed in her arms. Instead of praise, she was dragged into the reflection cell, accused of consorting with demons. She screamed for days before silence swallowed her. The church's records are filled with contradictions. Ecstasy that looks like lust, trembling bodies praised as holy, condemned as sinful, priests eager to parade visions when they brought pilgrims and coin, quick to crush them when they threatened authority. Some visions filled chapels with song, others ended in fire. And so, every time a sister cries out in the night, you wonder, is she touched by heaven or consumed by hunger her vows cannot erase? Is she saint or sinner? The abbess won't answer. She doesn't need to. Her power lies in deciding which is which. And the visions will keep coming, whether they are welcomed as miracles or punished as madness. The convent survives on silence and obedience, but it also survives on spectacle. When hunger grows too sharp, when discipline alone can no longer hold the sisters together, the abbess turns to miracles. And if heaven doesn't send them, she manufactures them herself. It begins with blood. A novice collapses in chapel, a cut opening on her palm that no one remembers seeing before. The abbess declares its stigmata, Christ's wounds blossoming in her flesh. The sisters gather, whispering prayers, staring at the crimson drops like they're proof of God's presence. Later, you catch a glimpse of the same novice in the infirmary, her palm bound tight, her eyes lowered. You wonder if she fell on stone, or if someone pressed the blade for her. There are stranger wonders, too. Candles that burn longer than they should, their wax never melting, bread that appears fresh days after baking, a veil that smells suddenly of roses, though no garden grows nearby. Each time, the abbess spreads the word. Pilgrims arrive, leaving coins at the altar, gifts of food at the gates. The convent's bowls fill heavier that week. Historians have found notes in episcopal visitations complaining of fraudulent miracles. In one English house, a nun was accused of painting wounds on her hands with chicken blood. In another, a statue of the Virgin was found to have a hidden pipe, dripping oil during feast days. The bishop condemned the trickery. The people, desperate for hope, kept coming anyway. You see how the abbess shapes the story. When Sister Clarice claims Christ kissed her in a vision, the abbess orders her to describe it in detail. Pilgrims are told of her ecstasy. Donations arrive. Clarice becomes a living relic, her trembling body paraded as proof of God's favor. But when Sister Magdala mutters that she saw shadows moving in the cloister, that voices whispered her name in the night, the abbess silences her. Demonic, she declares. Dangerous. Magdala is locked in the reflection cell, her visions erased as quickly as they came. The difference isn't holiness, it's usefulness. One evening during Vespers, the abbess presents a reliquary, a tiny box of bones said to belong to a martyred saint. She holds it high, the sisters bow, and the air in the chapel vibrates with awe. You can't help noticing the bone is pale, small, fragile enough to have come from a chicken. You lower your head anyway. Doubt is more dangerous than faith. The bells ring. The abbess smiles. Her convent has its miracle, its pilgrims, its coins. And you realize that behind these walls, heaven is not always found. Sometimes it's crafted, piece by piece, drop by drop of blood, feather by feather, lie by lie. The miracle isn't divine. The miracle is survival. Not every cry in the convent is a prayer. Some are screams. It begins in the dormitory, a sudden shriek that rips the night apart. A novice thrashes in her straw, eyes rolled back, limbs jerking like a puppet cut from its strings. The sisters rush to pin her down, but she bucks with a strength that seems impossible. Her mouth foams, her words spill out half Latin, half nonsense. The abbess watches, face unreadable, before declaring it not sickness but possession. From that moment, the girl is no longer just a novice. She is a battlefield between heaven and hell. The exorcism takes place in the chapel. The air reeks of smoke and sweat. Candles spit wax down the walls. The priest arrives, eyes wide with a mix of fear and authority. He presses a cross to the girl's forehead, mutters prayers in Latin that sound more like orders than comfort. Holy water splashes, drips into her hair, her mouth, her eyes. She screams louder. Some say demons speak through her. Others whisper it is only madness, hunger, exhaustion. But no one dares say it aloud. The sisters watch from the pews, their faces pale, their bodies trembling. Some cross themselves, some cover their ears, some stare, unable to look away. You kneel among them, the sound digging into your bones. The girl's screams rise and fall until they collapse into sobs. Then silence. She is carried out, limp as cloth. She will not be seen for days. When she returns, her eyes are dull, her lips cracked, her body thinner than before. No one speaks to her, no one asks. She has been marked. Historians record dozens of these cases, written in the dry ink of bishops' reports. Nuns writhing, crying out in ecstasy or terror, sometimes both. Some were praised as mystics, women touched by God. Others were condemned as possessed, beaten until bruises bloomed, starved until visions broke. The line between saint and sinner was always thin, and it was the abbess or the priest who decided where it was drawn. But not all madness was met with ritual. Some sisters simply broke under the weight of silence, hunger, discipline. They laughed at nothing. They wept during psalms. They muttered in corners to ghosts only they could see. For them, there was no exorcism, no priest, only the reflection cell, where darkness closed in and madness deepened. You lie awake some nights and wonder how many of the visions praised as holy were really just hunger, how many of the screams called demonic were only grief with no voice. The abbess will never answer. Her power lies in declaring which cries are God's and which belong to the devil, and either way, the screams are swallowed by the stone. The abbess believes silence means obedience. She believes hunger breaks will, fasting cleanses sin, and endless bells grind thought into dust. But silence in the convent does not always mean surrender. Sometimes silence hides rebellion. It starts small, a glance held too long when the abbess looks away, a smirk traded in the cloister while scrubbing floors, a prayer hummed deliberately off-key, the smallest ripple against the chant. The abbess thinks these things nothing, but to the women who live under her rule, they are sparks of defiance. Then come the codes. Embroidery is holy work, or so the abbess says. Hours bent over cloth, needles flashing, hands pricked until blood stains the thread. But the patterns stitched into altar cloths and habits often carry more than flowers and vines. A crooked stitch here, a hidden symbol there, a name, a word, a memory sewn into fabric where only the sister who placed it knows. Entire conversations threaded in silence, prayers turned into protest. Books too carry rebellion. In the scriptorium, where pages are copied until eyes blur, a careful hand adds more than psalms, tiny doodles carved into the margins, Birds that shouldn't be there, faces with knowing smiles, initials pressed into corners so faint they look like dust. The abbess never notices, but the sisters who handle those books pass them with secret grins. Scripture twisted into a vessel for laughter, for memory, for survival. And then there are the gardens, rows of cabbages, beans, and herbs the abbess demands for meals, but hidden among them, plants she doesn't sanction. A sprig of rue, a cluster of pennyroyal, leaves used not for stew, but for medicine and things unspoken. Knowledge passed in whispers, chew this to calm pain, brew that to ease blood. The abbess calls it superstition. The sisters call it life. Historians stumble across these traces centuries later, strange symbols stitched into habits, preserved in museums, psalters with odd sketches in their margins, convent gardens planted with herbs no abbess ever ordered. They look like scraps, but together they tell the truth. Obedience was never total. Silence was never empty. At night, you feel it most. The dormitory breathes slow. The abbess's keys jingle once down the hall, then fade. A girl shifts in her straw. Another slips a folded scrap into a sleeve. A name is whispered, soft as breath. You close your eyes, knowing the abbess would call it sin, but you know it for what it is, resistance. The convent believes silence is submission, but silence can be sharper than a blade. And in the hands of women denied everything else, silence becomes the weapon they wield best. The abbess believes fear keeps the convent in order. Hunger to weaken the flesh, silence to bind the tongue, punishment to crush the will. Most of the time, it works, but not always. Sometimes the weight becomes too much, and when it does, the silence breaks, not in whispers, but in revolt. It starts with small refusals, a novice who kneels but doesn't chant, a sister who fasts but steals crusts of bread from the kitchen after midnight, a group that lingers in the garden longer than permitted, eyes flashing with something hotter than obedience. The abbess senses it, but her punishments only sharpen the edge. One winter, the bread shrinks to crumbs, and the broth thins to water. The abbess dines in her chamber on meat stew, the smell drifting into the cloister. That night, the novices refuse to rise for matins. The bell clangs, the abbess storms into the dormitory, but they stay in their straw beds, eyes closed, mouths set in defiance. The punishment is swift, shaved heads, lashes, reflection cells, but the memory lingers. Even the abbess can't erase the shock of it. 20 women refusing God's call together. Chronicles tell of greater rebellions. In a convent outside Barcelona, the sisters barred the abbess from her own chamber, accusing her of hoarding coin and starving them. They locked the doors, sang their own psalms, and declared themselves free of her rule. The bishop's men came within days, dragging the ringleaders away in chains. The records never say where they were taken. The convent's silence after speaks louder than words. In France, another house erupted when an abbess punished 2 novices for forbidden affection. Their sisters rose in protest, slamming their bowls onto the refectory tables, chanting not prayers, but curses. They overturned benches, shattered clay jugs, and swore they would not kneel again until the punishment was lifted. The bishop's report describes it coldly as riotous disobedience, but you can almost hear the noise of it, the crash of rebellion echoing in the stone. The abbess calls these moments sins, proof of the devil's grip, but you begin to see them differently, not rebellion against God, rebellion against her, against the silence that suffocates, the hunger that starves, the punishments that bruise. At night, you lie in the dormitory and imagine it, the sisters rising together, not for prayer, but for themselves, not chanting psalms, but shouting their own names. The walls that seem so strong, shaking with the sound. The convent survives on obedience, but history remembers the cracks, and in those cracks rebellion blooms, wild and unrepentant. The abbess says the convent belongs to God, that every stone was laid for prayer, every hour given to Christ. But the truth shows itself at the refectory table, in the kitchens, in the ledgers locked in her chamber. The convent is not only a house of devotion, it is a business. And pilgrims arrive at the gates with coin in their hands. They kneel, they weep, they beg for blessings. For a price, candles are lit, prayers are promised, relics are touched to their foreheads. A tooth of a saint, a scrap of cloth, a vial of earth from the Holy Land, sometimes real, often not. The abbess holds these objects high, her voice trembling with practiced awe. The pilgrims don't question, they pay. They leave believing heaven has noticed them. The convent coffers swell. Inside, the sisters are put to work not just in prayer, but in production. Gardens grow herbs for medicine and for trade. Looms clatter with cloth meant for sale in town. Beeswax is gathered, melted, poured into tall candles that burn in noble houses. Every jar of honey, every bolt of wool, every stitched altar cloth becomes a coin for the abbess's lockbox. You hear the way the abbess bargains when merchants visit. A cask of wine exchanged for weeks of prayers. A basket of fish for a promise that the sisters will sing a mass for his family. Sometimes the merchants linger longer, laughter spilling out of the abbess's chamber with the smell of roasted meat. The next day, the convent dines better. The sisters are told to thank God. You know who they are really thanking. Historians record this side of convent life with dry words, economic necessity, but the truth is less neat. Some abbesses turned their houses into profit machines, feasting while novices starved. Others built networks of trade, supplying towns with bread and ale, taking coin from every mouth fed. The convent was supposed to be a tomb for women, but it often became a shop selling God, selling labor, selling silence. Even your own work is part of it. Hours bent over embroidery, stitching altar cloths that will be sold in markets. Long days in the apiary, hands sticky with wax, shaping candles that will burn in churches far richer than your own. You scrub, you sew, you sweat. The abbess counts the coins. At night, lying on your straw, you realize the truth. Holiness may be the story painted in books, the myth told to pilgrims, but here behind the walls, holiness is traded like grain. Salvation has a price tag, and the abbess knows how to collect. The convent prays. Yes, but the convent also sells, and God's house is run like a marketplace. The abbess preaches poverty, but her hands are never empty. Coins slip into them like beads on her rosary, grain, honey, spices, bolts of cloth. They all find their way into her chamber. The convent is a house of God, but it is also a vault, and the abbess is its keeper. You see how the system works. A noble family sends a chest of silver along with their daughter, and suddenly she is praised for her natural devotion. Her chores are lighter, her straw bed fresher, her bowl of stew thicker. A poor novice with no dowry scrubs floors until her skin cracks, and still she is accused of laziness. Holiness bends to the weight of coin. Bribes do more than soften chores. They buy safety. When a novice is caught whispering in the dormitory, the abbess threatens punishment until her uncle arrives at the gate with sacks of grain. The next morning, the girl is returned to her duties, pale but untouched. Another is discovered with a hidden letter, and her head is shaved in front of the entire convent. The difference isn't sin, it's silver. Historians comb visitation records and find the same pattern again and again. Abscesses accused of hoarding wealth, of lending convent money to family, of selling land meant for prayer to noblemen who lined their pockets. In one account, an abbess in France was discovered keeping her own chest of gold hidden under her bed. She was replaced, but her name lingers in ink, proof that holiness and greed often shared the same roof. The abbess plays politics beyond the walls, too. Bishops visit, and the convent suddenly blooms with candles, wine, and meat that the sisters never see at any other time. The abbess flatters them, gifts them jars of honey, even whispers promises of loyalty. In return, the convent earns exemptions from fasting, protection from scrutiny, silence over scandals too loud to ignore. You begin to realize the abbess does not rule only through scripture. She rules through exchange, power traded like grain, bribes passed like blessings, each coin a shield, each gift a weapon. At supper one night, you choose stale bread, while Joan, the abbess's favorite, dips hers in honey. The sweetness glistens on her lips as the abbess smiles, her eyes sharp as knives. Around you, novices lower their heads, pretending not to notice. But everyone does. The bells toll, pulling you back to prayer. The abbess bows her head, voice rich as she leads the chant. You close your eyes and hear only the clink of coins, louder than any psalm. And you know now what rules this house. Not God, not Christ, not prayer, gold. And they told you the convent was a sanctuary, a holy place where women could rise above the sins of the flesh, where silence brought peace, where prayer brought salvation. That was the myth. The reality was hunger gnawing your belly until you bent double. It was knees split open from stone floors, hands cracked from vinegar and cold water. It was the abbess feasting while you starved, priests slipping through hidden doors, punishments carved into your skin. It was whispered names in the dark, forbidden friendships punished as sin, pregnancies hidden in silence, babies smothered before dawn. The myth said angels lived here. The truth is that women lived here, angry, hungry, frightened, clever, rebellious. Women who stitched secrets into altar cloths, who brewed teas to heal what prayer would not, who whispered love when silence demanded obedience. Women who clawed at doors, who scaled walls, who ran. Some were caught, beaten, erased. Others vanished into the world, their veils traded for freedom. Historians argue still, were convents, prisons, or refuges? Both. For some, safety from a harsher world outside. For others, a tomb where they were buried alive. What cannot be argued is this: beneath the veil of holiness lay scandal, politics, and survival. And the voices that were supposed to be silenced kept finding ways to be heard in poems, in stitches in the margins of books, in the whispers passed after compline. You stand in the cloister one last time. The air is cold. The bells echo like iron chains. The abbess's shadow stretches long, but in the silence you hear it again. Not prayer, not Latin, a name. Whispered soft, almost lost in the stone, proof that the walls never killed everything. The convent's myth is one of purity. Its truth is one of hunger, desire, corruption, and defiance. And now you know what lay behind the gates. Not angels, just women, human, messy, scandalous, surviving as best they could. The doors slam shut. The story is over. But the whispers, even now, refuse to die.